Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McFarland, and this is the first Liberty Weekly podcast in over 6 months, I think. Things have been busy, man, busy life, and I've kept the Liberty Weekly website alive. I've noticed that there's a lot of subscribers, and there's a lot of people that are still downloading the episodes, and that is honestly awesome. Thank you guys so much. I've been able to keep the lights on without going into the red because of patrons that have kept supporting the show. And so I've been able to keep the website running and everything like that. We'll see. I'm actually getting ready to launch a new podcast with my wife called the Unhallowed Podcast about Gothic horror fiction. And we're really excited about that, but I won't bury the lead here. You've indulged me for about a minute. I want to talk about Ruth Bader-Ginsburg dying and everything that's happened in the last, 8 months since I stopped podcasting regularly. And I think I fizzled out a bit before that, but holy crap, so much has happened and I just want to go over and cover it. So I'll jump right on it. Ruth Bader-Ginsburg died about it was announced maybe an hour or two ago that she had passed away. And I'm not here to dance on anyone's grave. I think in the legal profession, you get a certain kind of respect for everyone that you practice with. And I guess just the decency of being a human, even though Ruth Bader-Ginsburg has done a lot of negative things from my perspective, for Americans everywhere. And just the fact that the Supreme Court is so highly politicized is a testament to exactly how bad things are. And if you've followed my work before, you know I've done a lot about judicial review and the place that the Supreme Court is supposed to have in our divided political system, the three branches of the federal government, in that it really shouldn't matter who's on the judicial branch, but it's become so powerful and highly politicized that it really matters. And in fact, maybe it's the most important thing is how the Supreme Court is made up and who's sitting on it. It really is so important, and it affects jurisprudence and the power of the federal government and the power of the federal government against the states, and how little power the states have, and how the federal government has just carved away civil liberties. And basically through the window of the 14th Amendment, it has taken over the state's Bill of Rights, and it has come to trump the state's Bill of Rights. And these are things I've covered in the show before. I think even in episode 2, libertyweekly.net/2, I covered how the federal government has taken over the states through the window of the 14th Amendment to determine exactly what is constitutional. The federal Constitution applies to the states through the window of the 14th Amendment. So yeah, it really has become really important, and that is the Supreme Court. And just as a brief overview too, because, people listening probably haven't listened to my entire back catalog, but I am not a believer that judicial review is a power that the Supreme Court should have. Now that comes with an asterisk, a nuance is that there's the clear case doctrine, is that if a law is clearly unconstitutional, there's no debating it, then the Supreme Court can strike it down with the power of judicial review. However, if a law is debatable in any sense, the constitutionality of a law is debatable, then the Supreme Court should send it back to the states or to the legislature to vote on it. And through Marbury versus Madison, it has been decided that the Supreme Court has the power of judicial review, saying which laws are unconstitutional and which are not. However, if before the Constitutional Convention and before the Constitution came about, there was a string of case law that had decided that, well, there were several strings of case law in the state courts which decided that it was an impeachable offense for a it was an impeachable offense for a Supreme Court justice to declare a law unconstitutional that wasn't clearly unconstitutional, because that was seen as a violation of separation of powers. And I can't remember exactly which episode. I'll put it in the show notes, though, if I find it. I think it's libertyweekly.net/LL2, Liberation Library. I did the William Watkins Jr. I did a piece on this when I reviewed his book. Something about I'm just going off the cuff here, and I haven't prepared at all for this, but it was William J. Watkins Jr. He did a book about the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions and their legacy. So that's at libertyweekly.net/LL2, I think. It's in the Liberation Library series. So without further delay, I just wanted to frame the issue here, but let's take a look at how complicated things are now that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has passed away. And so in The Atlantic, I'm looking at an episode, and of course, everything I look at is going to be incredibly leftist. Actually, I'll start with this Business Insider article, businessinsider.com.au for Australia, because there's an article here, and it's discussing, the title is Mitch McConnell confirms that Senate will vote on Trump's nominee to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell confirmed that the Senate will vote on a nominee to replace RBG. Ginsburg, 87, died of cancer on Friday, setting up a high-stakes battle in the Senate to confirm her replacement, with the 2020 presidential nomination looming in just 46 days. I think they mean the presidential election looming in 46 days. In 2016... am I right about that? I think they're voting in 46 days. That's a bit over a month. So that's like mid-November. So in 2016, McConnell took the opposite track when Justice Scalia died, or was killed, for you conspiracy-minded folks out there. I don't think I believe that or even know much about it to say either way. But, on this show, I entertain conspiracy theories. So, but to hold confirmation... So Mitch McConnell refused to hold confirmation proceedings for President Obama's nominee, Merrick Garland. It goes on to say he confirmed tonight that the Senate will vote on Trump's nominee to replace RBG. Apparently her last words were something about how she didn't want Trump to pick her replacement. So one thing I don't respect Ruth Bader Ginsburg for is that, although, she certainly is a very headstrong woman who is hardworking and devoted and passionate, and it's just very impressive that she was able to accomplish what she did. I'm not one to believe in social justice, but I don't know, maybe you'd have to keep your eyes closed to know that in her time, it was harder for a woman to succeed in the legal profession. But she was headstrong and pushed through it. I'm an individualist and not a collectivist. So I guess if you have listened to the show before, you should probably know that. So maybe I put that disclaimer out there. But it's not just because she's a woman. She is a strong individual. Even if I totally disagree with everything that she has done in jurisprudence, some things are good, but they are very few and far between. So it's just ridiculous to me that she would, for politics' sake, try to keep an iron skeleton grip on the Supreme Court gavel for as long as she did. It took until she was 87 years old, until her death, to step down from the Supreme Court. I mean, if nothing underscores how politicized the Supreme Court is and how powerful the Supreme Court is, the fact that a terminally ill woman would fight through several bouts of pancreatic cancer is what I think she died from. That she would fight through all that in an effort to survive until a Democratic president could replace her. And at some level, you tarnish what the judiciary is supposed to be, which is a nonpartisan position. And maybe that's an idealistic statement, but I really do think that conservative jurists believe that. Like maybe specifically, a specific example would be Justice Ann Bradley in the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Of course, if you listen to the show, you know I'm an attorney in Wisconsin, so I'm a member of the Wisconsin State Bar. But Justice Rebecca Bradley, she wrote, and if you read her opinions, you can see that she's a conservative jurist in the sense that conservatives don't believe in activist judges. They believe that what a judge's role is to say what the law is and not what it should be. And so she wrote actually a very strong opinion when Governor Evers was challenged on the COVID-19 lockdown decree, which, by the way, I don't think even said that he didn't have the authority to lock the state down. I think it just said that he did it the wrong way, which is disappointing. But she wrote a wonderful dissenting opinion. This was an opinion about postponing criminal jury trials, because it was that the Supreme Court actually did strike down Governor Evers' order. But she wrote a dissenting opinion in the decision to postpone criminal jury trials, and it was filled with wonderful libertarian language about due process and all that good stuff. And I gained a lot of respect for her, even though she has had other rulings before that maybe I wouldn't approve of per se. So the rest of this Business Insider article is just kind of, saying, oh, Mitch McConnell's a hypocrite because he believed one thing in 2016, which, people on the left don't really care about intellectual inconsistency. However, people on the right really don't either. It just, when you're getting pointed out for it, it just doesn't really matter. They just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, well, blue good, red bad, or vice versa. So Mitch McConnell said in 2016, the American people should have a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice. Therefore, Scalia's vacancy should not be filled until we have a new president. So it's really going to, it's going to be damn interesting what happens with everything being so divided. And my first reaction was, okay, well, are we going to get a new Supreme Court justice confirmed before the presidential election? And this just, if that's the case, if it's after the presidential election, then the plot is going to be even thickened more, and the stakes will be higher for this election. Even though, perhaps no one really thought Ruth Bader Ginsburg was going to survive through the next presidential term. So if Trump had won and Ruth Bader Ginsburg hadn't died, maybe the reaction would be the same. But the timing of her death, certainly before the election, is much more important for potential unrest than it is if she had died after the election. And so it's very, very interesting. And perhaps on some level, I should have thrown my voice in the ring during the last craziness of the lockdowns, but and the COVID-19 hysteria. But you could only imagine, if you're a listener of my show, what I think about it. At the beginning, I think I was afraid. I was apprehensive. And I think in a microcosm, it was really easy to see how people would have gotten scared, locked up, and then said, okay, well, everything's out of my control. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. If this really is as dangerous as everyone says it's going to be, I'll just keep my head down, not do or say anything, try to wait for more information to come out, and then form an opinion. But I don't think I was ever pro-lockdown. I remember saying that at the beginning. Maybe pro-voluntary lockdown. I was never pro-forced lockdown, and I remember voicing that opinion, of course, but it soon became very apparent and clear that none of the scaremongering tactics were really living up to the danger that everyone was shouting about. This was very soon, within a week or two after the lockdown order started. So I'm sure you guys all had similar experiences, but kind of forgot where I was going with this. But I think that once everything got politicized, things just picked up and everything kind of went downhill. And it wasn't apparent to me. I was surprised that the right became pro opening up and the left became pro lockdown. And I really would have thought that both parties would have been pro lockdown and everything would have been lockstep. But I suppose it makes a lot more sense for the upcoming boog or whatever is going to happen over the election. Hopefully nothing. Hopefully a peaceful transfer of power, or maybe even better, a peaceful dissolution of the United States into 50 different states. Hopefully peaceful. But for the division narrative and for the chaos of whatever political transition that the powers that shouldn't be are planning and putting into motion right now, of course, we need that division between COVID-19, open up and shut down, and pro-mask and anti-mask, and Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, and it's just insane. And I don't think any of us could have predicted this. And I know this is probably things that people have heard ad nauseum in the past, and from, Dave Smith's show or all the other cornucopia of libertarian podcasts. And I want to talk a little bit about, like where the show is at and where my life is at and everything like that, because it's been so long since I've talked to all of you. But I want to save that for the end. I'm just got so many thoughts because I haven't been on for so long, and I finally got the itch to podcast tonight, and it's been hard to get that itch for the past 6 or 8 months, despite my appearances on Actual Anarchy, which is always a good time. So I wanted to also to kind of frame what I was getting into just then about how divisive everything is. I don't know if you folks actually read some mainstream media articles, because I spend a lot of time watching Tim Pool videos. And the reason why I watch Tim Pool is because he's someone who's libertarian-ish. He leans, he's a lefty. He's described himself as being a radical centrist. He's somewhat left. He describes himself as being left, but the Overton window has shifted so much that Tim Pool is a alt-right character now, in quotes. But he, at least, he'll put on the screen and talk and share a story from, mainstream media sources, because he kind of, I don't know, he critiques the media, and he's kind of a media watcher. If you guys all watch Tim Pool, you probably do if you're in this space, or you've heard of him at least. He's been on Rogan. He's been on a lot of different things, but he's my only exposure to mainstream media, because I don't watch CNN. I don't watch Fox. It puts me in too bad of a mood. And frankly, I don't even think that I have satellite. I might get it on the antenna because I have an antenna or something. But so the narrative is so politicized and charged that reading a news article is like opening 1984. And that's such a cliched thing to say or talk about right now, but it really is stunning, just that comparison. It's newspeak. Everything is. And, at the point in time that Orwell was writing, I think he probably thought he was emulating exactly what was in the newspapers, maybe, which if I recall correctly, I think Orwell was a socialist, which makes everything, he was a democratic socialist at the time, maybe, which makes everything interesting and maybe a little hypocritical, unless I'm wrongly remembering, which is very possible. But it is shocking to me to read articles from the mainstream media, and just to see, if you pick it apart, it really is incredible how charged it is and how skilled these folks must be. And maybe they're not even trying it, but how skilled these reporters must be to write every single letter in a way to subconsciously frame the issues and manipulate your thinking. So let's take something here. This is an article that was actually shared. I won't say any more, but I found it from a certain source that was very interesting to me. But the title is "The Violent Defense of White Male Supremacy," and this is an article in The Atlantic. And the subtitle is Trump and his supporters are defending an America where white men can rule and brutalize without consequence. This is published September 9th of this year, so just 9 days ago. What Americans did and defended this summer will be inscribed into history forever. The summer began before the summer officially began. The summer ended before the summer officially ended. Wow, how poignant. The summer began on May 25th when the police officer Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in Minneapolis, Minnesota, suffocating his pleas for life. So if you followed the show, you know that I went to law school in Minneapolis. Oh, actually, I went to law school in St. Paul, but I went to the University of Minnesota, and I started the podcast, and most of the episodes are from when I lived there. So maybe I should have jumped on the horn to give some background information. I can't remember where Derek Chauvin was killed by police. I think it was in Uptown or thereabouts on Lake Street. And that's maybe a couple miles away from where I lived on Grand Avenue, which is southwest of St. Paul, maybe just a little bit west of St. Paul. But Grand Avenue is close to Summit. And this is kind of where the lumber barons lived back in the day. Up the street, maybe, there's kind of a bluff that overlooks downtown St. Paul, and it's where the cathedral is. So if you are familiar with the area or anything, if you're not, maybe this doesn't make any sense at all to you. But there's an area up there where all the lumber baron mansions are, and actually there's that Hill. He was a lumber baron, he was a railroad guy, and he had the only privately financed railroad that didn't accept government subsidies. He lived on the bluff that overlooks, next to the cathedral, on the bluff that overlooks downtown St. Paul and the XL Energy Center. But if you go down the street, there's Summit and Grand that run parallel to each other just west on this bluff. It parallels I-94 that goes through the middle of St. Paul and links up with downtown Minneapolis. Well, all these riots happened in kind of the uptown area on Lake Street. I'm going to look at a map to kind of help me here. There's no video episode with this that I usually put out, but in my heyday, I had video episodes with visual aids. But I don't have that now, so I apologize. But maybe I'll put a link in the show notes. I don't know. Just go on to Google Maps and look at St. Paul. So if you look at St. Paul, you follow I-94, it goes to the west. And then south, there's 35 east, that it's the Interstate 35 runs all the way down south through like Iowa and Kansas City and Missouri and all the way down to Texas. But it splits in half through the Twin Cities, so you get 35. Sorry, I'm going through this whole... You want to know everything there is to know about the cities? Well, if you follow Selby, and there's Grand and Summit Avenue, you just follow 35 south from St. Paul, and you follow Grand Avenue. And I lived on Grand Avenue at the intersection of Hamlin Avenue and Grand Avenue. So, if you just follow that west, you go across the Mississippi River, and Uptown is right south of Minneapolis. Maybe people that actually lived around South Minneapolis will know this area better than I do, because I didn't go there very often. But Uptown is over there by, I think, Lake Calhoun. No, maybe that's a different area. But so this is just south of Minneapolis. So it's maybe a mile or two from where I lived. But there was rioting that happened, and there were shops and windows that were destroyed on the street that we lived on. And we didn't live there anymore, but it was interesting to see all of our old haunts get windows smashed and stuff like that. And to have friends that still live there and worrying about their safety and having them tell us about it and everything. So a lot has been said about this, and sorry for that aside there. But I mostly agree with Dave Smith on a lot of things, and his take on it is one that I mostly agree with. So But to see how charged this is and how far apart we are, I don't know if any of you have actually read this drivel or anything. I'm sure you've read things like it, but something is going down is the point that I'm trying to get at, is that rhetoric and feelings have moved so far apart that it's irreconcilable at this point, because you get different parties that are watching, the two different sides, they're watching the same, physically sitting in the theater watching The Dark Knight, but one right people are seeing one movie and the left people are seeing another movie. Maybe they go into the movie theater and it's The Dark Knight playing, but one group sees the Joker and the other group sees The Dark Knight. I guess that implies that one party is seeing the real film and one isn't, when they both aren't. But so I'm a critic of police brutality, and I always have been on the show. And I've done lots of things talking about how the police aren't here to protect you. And that's my most watched YouTube video about, it was Castle Rock versus Gonzalez. Well, it wasn't Castle Rock. I did one about that, but I'm just not remembering. I'm a little rusty here, guys, but I'm not remembering the Supreme Court. It's not a Supreme Court case. It's a DC Court of Appeals case. But anyways, George Floyd, I think things will come out, but I don't think there's enough to charge Derek Chauvin or the other officers criminally and for them to be convicted. And that's really going to blow up whenever that comes out. And I know they had preliminary hearings. The terminology might be different in Minnesota, but they had hearings, like probable cause hearings, where you can challenge the prosecution's evidence at the very beginning of the criminal process. And I know they just had hearings on that. I don't know if they got a judgment. I haven't followed it close enough to see if there was a judgment from that hearing. But I know that it happened. And usually in a big case like that, the judge will hear arguments on the motion and there will be some testimony and cross-examination. And as a defense attorney, it's your chance to really feel out the prosecution's case very early in the suit or in the criminal case. But usually the judge will hear that, they'll hear all the testimony, and then they'll take a month to make a ruling on it. And it might be a written ruling in a case this important, so you have that. But otherwise it would be preserved in the transcript. But I digress. If it was an oral ruling, I don't think there's enough. And without getting into the actual, I haven't done a real legit legal analysis of it, but it just, to me, it seems like, there were cases where, again, in Minneapolis, there was the guy, Philando Castile, that was shot, and he had a concealed carry permit, I think, and he was reaching for his wallet and he was shot and killed, and the officer, got off on that. And I think that was a much stronger case than this one. I'm not sure if that was a stronger case than this one, but if the officer who shot and killed Philando Castile would get off in that one, it wouldn't surprise me if Derek Chauvin and the other officers got off on this one. But you had this unique moment where even people on the right were watching the video and they were like, there's something wrong about this. But then everything was ruined with the protesters. Well, not with the protesters. See how the conditioning works, where everything was ruined with the rioters. And then you just had everyone on the right turning against Black Lives Matter. And there was really a moment for the two sides to understand each other a little bit there. And maybe the conspiracy in me would say that, okay, well, when everyone on the right saw that police officers would enforce unconstitutional lockdowns with a smile on their face, maybe everyone on the right started to realize that, hey, it's not, the thin blue line can encircle you and they will do whatever their masters say. So maybe it isn't the best idea to support them when they had so easily come and enforce unconstitutional edict and clearly infringe on liberty. Then the powers that be needed something to rabble everyone and to remind the people on the right exactly who they belong to and who they worship. So I was talking about this Atlantic article, and I found content to talk about, so that's good. But I hope you're following. It's been a while since I've done a podcast like this, but yeah. So everything has just got real crazy, and it turned out that George Floyd, I heard somewhere, so don't quote me on this, but I heard somewhere that George Floyd actually had a lethal dose of fentanyl in his system at the time that he died. And I think the causation is just so circumspect that these charges aren't going to stick. And then what happens then? But so the vitriol with which each side is divided and looking at each other in reading articles like this that are just gnashing at the teeth and fear-mongering so hard against half the country, maybe even more than half the country. But so Trump tweeted, let's see, I'll start again. So the summer began on May 25th when the police officer Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in Minneapolis, Minnesota, suffocating his pleas for life. Largely peaceful demonstrations followed, mostly peaceful demonstrations followed, and Trump tweeted, "These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen." He added, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." If only people had free reign to protect their property in that way. The summer ended on August 25th when Kyle Rittenhouse borrowed an AR-15 style assault rifle, charge language, from a friend and allegedly fatally shot Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber and injured Gage Grosskreutz. These three people had been demonstrating in Kenosha, Wisconsin, against the police shooting of Jacob Blake 2 days earlier. Trump suggested that Rittenhouse acted in self-defense, which he clearly did from the videos. This is my own editorializing. Maybe he shouldn't have been there in the first place. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. But I think it was clear he was acting in self-defense. He was trying to get away from them, Trump said, and he fell, and then they very violently attacked him. He probably would have been killed if he didn't defend himself with lethal force. People that I'm friends with I remember the very next day we're talking about this Kyle Rittenhouse incident, and they were framing it as if Kyle Rittenhouse was a deranged mass shooter akin to the Virginia Tech massacre or Columbine shooter, and that he had just showed up to a protest and opened fire on people. A protest, not a violent riot where buildings and property were being destroyed. That he was some kind of a Dylan Roof shooter who showed up and just started unloading on people unprovoked. And I was wondering, and they had said that they had watched the videos too, and maybe that was a point for me where it was really clear to me that there's something happening here. In some way, I felt vindicated because if you listen to the podcast, I'm black-pilled for, I don't know, I think I started the show in like 2017 or 2018, but I'm black-pilled from the very beginning. And I'm sure most of my friends and family at times thought that I was insane or that I was some fruity nut job or something like that. But in a way, it felt good to be vindicated when all of a sudden the world was turned upside down over COVID and over all these things. And now everything's so uncertain. But I would rather have been wrong in a lot of ways. Of course, I couldn't have predicted that exactly this would happen. And in no way am I some kind of person with special knowledge or immensely intelligent over everyone else to have called and predicted everything. I'm no Peter Schiff or anything like that. Wink, wink. But to be constantly saying that there's going to be a day of reckoning and that the American experiment and this country is headed down the wrong path, I don't know. It feels like some kind of vindication, even though it's bittersweet and it's not a great thing to be living through or experiencing or to see other people LARP through. I mean, it's crazy all this stuff is happening in the Midwest, in states that I live in and have lived in. But you really, at this point in time, when I had seen and heard people that I know watching the video and having a completely different take on it, and really, I mean, the NPC meme has really just it's just been incredibly pervasive, and the reality of it is getting more and more disturbingly real, because it's literally, at one point it was just a joke, like, oh, they just spout CNN talking points or what have you, or Fox News talking points, but now it is literally the script, like the words verbatim that come out of their mouth. Another point is that they eat this for breakfast. I mean, they eat this stuff up. They really do. And it's just like booga booga. So the violence of Chauvin and Rittenhouse bookended the summer of Trumpism. The 3 long, hot months from May 25th to August 25th, it compressed 413 years of American history into a cell phone video in which anyone could easily see the history for what it has always been, the violent self-defense, quote, of white male supremacy. Colonialism, capitalism, slavery, slave trading, Indian removal, manifest destiny, colonization, the KKK, Chinese exclusion, disenfranchisement, Jim Crow, eugenics, which, oh my gosh, eugenics was always a progressive thing. Always. Massive resistance, law and order, Islamophobia, family separation, all were done in the name of defending life or civilization or freedom. Wow, so, okay. So I don't know if I've actually read this article, but the pedigree from which this article was shared in group chats that I'm privy to in professional circles, the pedigree of this article is astounding for the radicalized language that is in here, in the message that's in here. It's just astounding to me that this is legit, that this is a real article that people have faith in. I mean, everyone would have you believe that the mythos of the mythos of the American story is nothing but white male supremacy. You know, I guess it doesn't surprise me going through AP history, and I wasn't in high school, I guess, that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, but I remember, reading a lot about the sins of the white man and everything, but really to chalk everything up is to being this original sin. It's crazy. So Trumpism is the latest or last chapter in the story of this America. Like its antecedents, Trump is the violent defense of white male supremacy. Adherents of Trumpism think they are facing a choice between white male supremacy and anarchy, if only. And right now, Trump's federal agents, Trump-supporting paramilitary domestic terrorists, and Trump-supporting police officers from Kenosha to Austin believe they are fighting against anarchy, which is to say they are fighting to maintain white male supremacy, which is to say they are defending law and order, defending their America where white men can rule and brutalize without consequence. So that's everything that it is. It's insane. Just this message. It kind of astounds me reading it that people really believe this. I guess they could say the same about my podcast and anarcho-capitalism. But so Trump supporters have been defending their America against this summer of anti-racism. Oh, another comment. Trumpism is the latest or the last chapter in the story of this America. So that sounds to me like a revolutionary communist statement. Just putting that out there. But so Trump supporters have been defending their America against this summer of anti-racism, because that's what all the looting and violence and Antifa running amok has been. That's not even a comment on legitimate First Amendment practicing protesters, even though I might not agree with their message. But so from May 25th to August 25th, there were at least 7,750 anti-racist demonstrations in 2,400 locations across all 50 states and DC. Mostly peaceful. But by Independence Day, when as many as 26 million people participated in the demonstrations, the anti-racist movement had already been recognized as the largest movement of any kind in American history. The American people marched and rallied for Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, for all the black and brown and indigenous people disproportionately dying of state violence and COVID-19, because everything's out to get you. For all the people suffering under the weight of racist power and policy. About 93% of these demonstrations remained peaceful. So out of thousands and thousands of demonstrations, 93% of them were peaceful, were mostly peaceful. Only 7% of demonstrations turned violent through clashes with counter-protesters or police, too often sparked by officers, so it's not our fault, or through property damage on, quote, specific blocks, the report stated. So I'm not going to read this whole article, but I see. So it goes into a call to arms went out on the since-deleted Facebook page Kenosha Guard for the evening of August 25th. Any patriots willing to take up arms and defend our city tonight from the evil thugs. So this is, I mean, what it really turns into is drawing the battle lines, saying that basically Trump supporters, and it might talk about the Boog Boys. I just haven't seen if that's Boog. Nope, that's not in the article, but it's equating everyone who would dare pick up arms as being a dyed-in-the-wool Trump supporter. Whoever would take up arms to defend their communities as being a Trump supporter. So, you know, by this logic, the roof Koreans in the LA riots would be Trump supporters. People that come out like that. That's what this is. So I would encourage you to go read the entire article at The Atlantic. I'll put a link in the show notes page. And I don't even know what episode I'm on. libertyweekly.net/130. This is episode 130 of the podcast. And I'll put the link in the show notes page here, and you can read the rest of it for yourself. But I suppose I can just riff off of it a little bit more, is that they're drawing the battle lines here, it seems like. And I guess I'm not like, you know, in the past I've been black-pilled, but also a collapsitarian. And I remember, I haven't heard the term collapsitarian in a long time. Maybe that's because the collapse is here and we don't need to cheer for it anymore, or ironically wish for it in some way or another. It seems like we're at a point where people are picking sides, or at least maybe we're past that point, and maybe this is like me just parroting what I've heard Tim Pool say. But when you actually get down and you watch Tim Pool do his videos where he reads articles or everything like that, but he doesn't read the entire article because he spares you from it. But if you actually go and read it, it's really a trippy experience, because you're reading newspeak, you're wondering how people are swallowing this hook, line, and sinker. But you also realize that, like, no, it's not good writing, but yes, it is good writing, because it's not good reporting, but it's good writing because it's completely taking these people for a ride. You know, if only libertarianism and ANCAPs had writers that were as skilled at propaganda as these mouthpieces for the state are. I mean, it's incredible. In some way, it's awe-provoking. It's just crazy, but it's working. And you see people lining up, and maybe this only happens if you're paying attention, but I think now with COVID-19, it's happening whether you pay attention or not, because it's right in your face and you can't get away from it. And maybe you get away from it a little bit if you live in the country, perhaps, but otherwise you're drinking the Kool-Aid and you're completely on board, and you're completely on board with it. But anyway, that's about it in terms of, I think, all I wanted to cover. But we're going to get more of this. And now that RBG is dead, bringing this all full circle, this rhetoric is only going to increase, and the stakes are higher. And we'll see exactly what places like The Atlantic and all these other outlets start putting out now that RBG is dead, and the sake of the Supreme Court going majority conservative or strong majority conservative and taking on certain issues and actually chipping away at these great accomplishments that the left sees that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has made in terms of equality and abortion and gay rights. And I can't remember when Planned Parenthood versus Casey was, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg was on that court or not. But it just seems like there's so many things in line. I mean, you get RBG dying, and then now you really get this mail-in voting stuff and how inherently unreliable it seems to be and prone to fraud. And I don't know how democracy, and we don't live in a democracy, and the United States is not a democracy. I've said this so many times on the podcast, but how could any representative republic work if you're directly electing your representatives? How could any direct democracy function? Maybe I'll phrase it that way. How could it work or function if you have no integrity of the voting system? And how do you get that back? Maybe it was never, maybe there never was any integrity to the voting system. I would suspect that, but maybe there never was and we just didn't know it. But now in the digital age, it's apparent that there's no integrity to it. You can't rely on it. It's just a big farce. But now people are waking up to that fact when the official news sources are questioning the integrity of our elections, and the stakes are getting so high, it just is crazy. So RBG dying, now no one trusts the electoral process because mail-in voting doesn't work. It just seems so prone to fraud, and they're already saying that Trump won't accept the results of the election. And I feel like the only thing that could, like the safest thing that could happen would be for Trump to win in a landslide. I don't know. I just don't see Biden winning in a landslide. I don't see that as something that's even remotely possible. But who knows? People in Antifa have already said that Joe Biden would be the easier one to overthrow. And maybe a Kamala Harris administration would be easier to overthrow than a Donald Trump administration. So maybe it's the case that the violence doesn't stop even if Donald Trump loses or Joe Biden wins. It'll be a really interesting ride. And Tim Pool was already saying that the DNC was game planning situations in which, like electoral or the election situation, if Donald Trump were to win by a thin majority, and John Podesta was the one who was playing in this war game, basically was playing the DNC and the Joe Biden campaign, and it ended in the secession of California and Seattle, or in Washington, from the United States, and like a West Coast secession, which was really interesting. And maybe that happens. I don't know. It really just interesting moment in history I had to talk about and kind of pontificate on. Yeah, that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know it's been a while. Sorry for shaking the rust off a little bit. Just wanted to get out there and talk a bit about it. Like I'm going to talk a little bit now about myself and the show and where I'm at and everything. So if you want to duck out, that's fine. But so I haven't had any inspiration. You know, I've kind of gotten away a lot from politics, even though I still follow it. But after doing the podcast for so long, I just felt like I didn't have anything to say that was unique anymore, and burnout and all that kind of stuff. But I've still been following, and I've been wanting to get out there and put out content, but it's like there's this violent force, or it's like writer's block. There's this force where, you know, I think about things that I could do shows on, or I'm to the point where I would want it to be produced and immaculate and perfect and well-researched. And then I just don't have the time, and daily life comes up and I'm busy with work or my son and my family. And then it just doesn't happen. I just thought I'd jump on here. You know, I've been basically just keeping on, trying to keep up with my Liberty folks. And wanting to get back out there a little bit, I have tried to be starting a new podcast with my wife to see what it's like podcasting to a niche audience that isn't as small or as busy as the libertarian scene. Because let's face it, there's like 300 or 400 libertarian podcasts out there that are all kind of talking about the non-aggression principle or, what have you. And I've done a podcast in the past about how everyone should have their own podcast. And that's great that everyone has their own podcast, but there's so many out there and I see new ones all the time, and I haven't been out in that space, even though I think I've had some mild success in this sphere. But, there's already 5 or 6 podcasts that are pretty well established that have guests that I just don't have the connections to get on. Although I do believe at one point I talked about things that were a bit more niche than everyone else, specific legal concepts that not a lot of people were having on the show, or I presented it in a well-researched kind of way that was different than like an entertainment talk show or an interview show, but one that did a bit more deep theoretical dives or kind of went into actual, the great works and tried to digest it and present it in a way that people could follow better. It was more accessible to them. And that's so much work. I could do a bit more, but it seems like maybe if I didn't have a kid or a wife and family. The problem with the libertarian sphere is that it's so small and there's just not a lot of money in it. And maybe I could invest my time a bit more if there was payoff and I was making money doing it, then I could justify it and it'd be a bit more of a motivator. Not that I don't like, interacting with all my friends or people or the listeners, and I love putting out this content and being in this space, and that's certainly rewarding. But I think you all know how, when time is scarce and you have a career and a kid and family to take care of, unless you're bringing in some money by doing this, it's not something that it gets hard to motivate just on pure passion and willpower alone. So my wife and I are starting a podcast, and this is a gothic horror podcast because we got into horror podcasts and found out that the market for horror podcasts is actually one of the biggest markets in the whole podcasting world. Politics is pretty big too, not fringe anarchist politics, but the horror scene is actually really big, and there's only 1 or 2 podcasts out there that actually analyze Victorian Gothic horror, like Dracula and Frankenstein and The Castle of Otranto and H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe and all those great works. I mean, there's a ton of H.P. Lovecraft podcasts, but not ones that encapsulate everything that all the authors that I just said. Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte, all those different works. And so I'm going to be doing that with my wife. We're both English majors. We met in Gothic horror fiction class. And so in a way, it's kind of going back to our roots, but it's something nice that my wife and I can do together. And hopefully the niche is big enough to actually make money doing it. And I'm hoping maybe that my wife could, if it took off and actually was making some money, then my wife could quit her job and just do that. Because we're planning on having a second kid. We would like her to be able to stay home, and this would be a good thing to bring in some money, and it'd be a part-time thing if it were able to take off. And plus, we would have the added benefit of reading a whole bunch of really cool stories, being able to talk about them. But I want to make them fun and interesting and accessible to kind of a lay audience, because, a lot of the really, really big horror podcasts, they all tell ghost stories, or they research paranormal things and present them that way, and maybe talk about conspiracy theories and things like that. But again, that market is saturated with a lot of shows. So we'll see how it goes, and it'll be very adaptable, I think. The name is Unhallowed. The name is just Unhallowed, but it's at unhallowedpodcast.com. So I'll put a link in the show notes page, libertyweekly.net/130, and there will be a link there to our new podcast. The website is already set up, so you can go there, check it out if you would. We don't have episodes yet, but I'm looking to launch in the next hopefully in 2 weeks to launch. We got our Tom Woods shout out coming up, hopefully around Halloween. That's the plan. Get the show running by then. We're going to launch with 4 episodes. And so check that out. We're setting everything up still on hallowedpodcast.com. I'll put a link in the show notes page. Make sure when it comes out, you subscribe. If you enjoy my content, of course, it'll be me, my wife, hopefully having a lot of fun doing it. And hopefully it takes off. So I really appreciate you guys if you've still been subscribed to the Liberty Weekly podcast. If you've followed my work, if you continue to support the show, I would like to get back to this. And if I'm podcasting at Unhallowed Podcast, of course, I'm going to get the itch to do a Liberty Weekly show. And I still have the website running. I'm still keeping the lights on. So if you feel so inclined as to support, go over to patreon.com libertyweekly.net/Patreon, or search us on patreon.com. And I'm going to cross-post the benefits. So when the new show comes out, I'm going to cross-post our Patreon benefits to the Liberty Weekly page as well. And, I'll be around the mic and the computer a lot more. So I really would like to put out a lot more bonus content. So there's other ways to support too, libertyweekly.net / I think it's support. Well, anyways, there will be links in the show notes page as well. So, well, I really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Feels good to jump on and just speak my mind quite a bit. Hope you're doing well. Hope your family's well during this pandemic, in quotes, during this time of the gross increase in state power. Stay safe out there. Maybe I'll lend my voice to comment on what's happening with the election, and hopefully not, but as things go downhill, buckle up. Maybe. We'll see. Go buy some ammo. Hope you're safe. Thanks, guys. Take care.
In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.